show you some stretches that I do that I've based around injuries that I've had. It may not work for you, and that's fine, but it just warms your body up a little bit. Then we're going to go through a focused practice drill, which is something that I do with my guys and with my students, where we're going to break everything down into segments, time segments, where I'll explain a drill. We'll do the drill for 5 minutes, 10 minutes until I feel like everybody's got it. If you got questions about it, it's not working, I'm going to be wandering around. We'll try to fix it then. If you can't fix it, come back to me at the end and we'll talk about it some more. Okay? So we're going to do boom, 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 roll through some drills like that. We're going to do practice tournament, which is something that I do in Atlantia, and lots of other groups do it as well. Then we're going to have a roundtable discussion and talk about our strengths and our weaknesses and things that we feel like we've learned today. And then I'd like to see some sparring from you guys where we can do some focused instruction. You can get instruction from me or from the other knights and the other experienced fighters here to kind of get some feedback on stuff that you're doing. Okay, so the purpose today is to learn and to learn in a mindful manner, and to cherish this time. We're going to talk about that too. Are we ready to go with that? All right. So I'm Sir Bryce Byram. I'm from the Kingdom of Atlantia. I've lived there my whole life, except for a couple of years that I lived in the East when I was in school. I started in the SCA when I was about 15, 16 years old, and it took me a few years to get around to fighting. So I think I started fighting about 94, 95. It's been about 20 years now. As Sir Godfrey said, I'm a knight. I'm also a Laurel and Pelican. Today, we're going to break the class down into 4 sections. Okay, the first section is how to train. All right. The second section is training technique, and then how to coach and how to teach, which is something different, but it's related and similar. We're going to talk a little bit about tourney prep and the mental game, and how to increase your skills in that area. And then we're going to talk a little bit about regional fighting styles and the culture at arms, because that's something that Sir Godric and I discussed at length at Penzic. That's going to be a little Q&A heavy, and we'll talk about, try to share some experiences there. We don't want that to go on too long, because we want to start getting into the drills and the fighting and stuff, and I don't want you guys to get too long. Okay? So that's how we're going to go through today. I'm going to start you out, so I can find my little piece of paper, with a couple of quotes. 2 quotes I'm going to read for you that describe what we do in the context of our art and the way that we do it. And the first one is from the 12th century, and it's from the history of William Marshall. What is it then to bear arms? Does one employ them as one might a harrow, a winnowing fan, or an axe? No, it is a far more arduous labor. What then is chivalry? So strong a thing, and of such hardihood, and so costly in the learning, that a wicked man or low dare not undertake it. Whoever would enjoy high honor must first suitably display that he's been well schooled to such arts. The second quote is from the 20th century, and it's from Pavarotti, Luciano Pavarotti. I was a musician for a number of years, and so we're going to talk a lot about measure and fighting on the beat and fighting off the beat. Pavarotti had a quote about practice, and he said, "For every day that I don't practice, it is as if I did not practice for 2 days. And for every 2 days that I don't practice, it's as if I didn't practice for a week. And for every week that I don't practice, it's as if I didn't practice for a year." So practice is a mindset, and it's something that you do as part of the eventual goal. There should be no difference between your tournament fight and your practice fight in the ideal situation. And at the same time, they should be 2 completely different things. So we'll talk about both of these things. So the first thing I want to share with you is my basic philosophy and what was taught to me by my knight and by the excellent coaches and teachers that I've had over the years. One of the first things my knight said to me that really resonated, and I tell it to all my students, is he said, in his own way, that we are 100% in charge of how much we suck. And that's a good thing and that's a bad thing. What he meant by that was we are 100% in charge. So we make the choice every time that we choose to fight or not to fight. Every time we choose to do mental work, repel work, or practice work, or to lay down and not do that. We make that choice. It's a really great responsibility. Okay, so it's good in that you can push yourself. I've had a student knighted. I've had several other students. One of my squires was knighted. Had several other students knighted. I didn't do the work. They did the work. I provided the guidance. But if the heart to do it is not there, then the rest of it doesn't mean anything. The other thing that I'm going to say is that I approach fighting as individual martial art with exception for techniques. In other words, there are techniques that are universal no matter what style you fight. I don't care if your foot's here, if your foot's here, if your foot's here, if your arm's here, if your arm's here. That doesn't matter to me. as long as you understand basic power generation, if you understand timing and distance. That's generic across SCA fighting, okay? The trick for you as a student of the art is to absorb things like a sponge and take the things that work for your particular body style and your particular strengths and your particular weaknesses and build your own style out of that. So I call that the a la carte mentality for technique, okay? Once you have learned basic fundamentals of how to generate a blow, of how to block a blow, you need to start tailoring and tweaking. You do that with the help of experienced coaches and teachers, and you do that through your own work. Okay? One of the most important things about becoming a good fighter is humility. And it's something that it's almost a joke, and people laugh, oh, that's the knightly virtue that's always, forgotten in knights. But because they're thinking about how, pompous we can be a lot of times, right? But that's not really what the humility that I'm talking about. The humility that I'm talking about is a way of examining you and examining yourself as a fighter. The example that I like to use is that I call it the poor mirror, okay? When we look at the world, we're always making observations. And we're always judging and critiquing. That's part of our genetic makeup. When I watch, Sir Tim, oh wait, that's not Sir Tim. When I watch Sir Cedric fight, I'm going to be making judgments and evaluations about what I like about his style, how I feel I can fight it, how I watch other people fight against him. That's judgments that I make. And 9 times out of 10, because I have experience and because I've studied the art, my judgments are going to be pretty good. Where we fall down as students is in judging ourselves. We look through the poor mirror. We look at the mirror, and in order to have self-confidence, in order to be able to be successful, we gloss over the parts of ourselves that aren't as perfect as they need to be, and we say, oh, yeah, I don't do that one thing very well, but I do these other things. And so we ignore that part, sometimes to our detriment as fighters. So one of the first steps in becoming good is realizing that you are not as good as you think you are, You need to look to the knights and the experienced fighters at your practice and in other practices and in your kingdoms and other kingdoms when you go to inter-kingdom wars, and you need to really listen to what they say. Sometimes it'll sound like just utter tripe. It just won't make any kind of sense, okay? And it's not necessarily that it's wrong. It's just you're not in a place where you can hear it, or they're not saying it in a way that you can understand it, right? But that's really important to your growth as a fighter. So take a really hard look at your training. This isn't about your self-worth. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean that you're lazy. You can be lazy, but that's not what it's about. It's about sitting down and being mindful and really thinking about who you are as a fighter, not as a man or as a woman, okay? And once you've done that and you've made a real critical assessment, then you can start working on setting goals for yourself. Now, why are goals important? Obviously, they're mileposts, okay? The individual thing is not important. Your thing may be, I want to advance 2 more rounds in this big tournament. Ursus Mass is coming up next weekend, right? So I want to go 2 rounds farther than I did last year. Or I want to win the tournament, or I want to place. Whatever that goal is, well, I hate to tell you, but the time for that goal was 6 months ago. It was, 6 years ago. It's not 6 days before. So, and I'm not saying that as a negative thing. It doesn't mean you can't take something and start to apply it, but it's consistent work over a period of time is one of the things that make great fighters. There are some fighters, and we'll talk about this later, that are natural fighters, and some fighters that are pluggers. And either way, both of them did the work. I guarantee you that guy who's just a phenom in your kingdom, who nobody can lay stick on, he didn't just show up and pick up a stick. There may be 1 or 2 guys who do that, but across the SCA, those really great guys, they do 3 or 4 things very well because they put the time and the effort in, and they earn their spurs. So you want to set goals for yourself, whatever that is. Once you have examined yourself, once you set those goals, you want to start training. And I hope everybody realizes that there's a difference between training and fighting, okay? Fighting is, we're in a fight. My mind is not blank. Some people use the martial arts example of no mind. I don't like saying no mind because it's a focused mind, okay? I'm a laser, I'm a sword, and that's my job in that particular fight. But when I'm training, I approach fighting in a different way. And when I'm teaching, I approach fighting in a different way. And for me, sometimes, personally, it can be very hard to shift. Like today, I'm probably fighting pretty crappy because I'm very focused on other people's fight, and so that pulls my mind away from what it should be, a calm, still, centered focus on the fight. So the way that I like to think about that is I think of it as a relaxed body and a focused mind. One of the first things you see in a, did you pop up for a minute? One of the first things you see in a, just stand in your regular guard, you know, I'm a new fighter and I'm going up against a knight or an experienced, all this body tension, everything's here in the arms. If you feel, you know, feel my arm right there, it's tight right there, it's tight right there, right? It's a very visible thing. Why? They're scared, okay? So that happens, and when that happens, it's actually harder for me to react to him. If he goes to move and I'm clenched, I've got to unclench and then try to move. Whereas if he goes to move and I'm relaxed, I can just move and make a read a lot quicker. I don't know if you can see the difference in that, but it's a real small one. So a relaxed body, a focused mind. So the mental aspect of that is being fully in the moment and appreciating what we do. You know, of the millions and millions of people alive on the earth today, and all of our brothers and sisters who came before us and have passed, we get to do this thing. And it's just cool as hell. You know, this is it's a cherishable moment, it's a precious thing. Okay? So the time that we invest in it, we should be fully invested. You know, my wife told me to set a timer because I get off track. So that's one of the things that I want you to think about yourself. How do I approach my fighter practice? So I just go out and fight whoever's there? Do I go in with a plan for what I'm going to be working on? Or do I just go and swing a stick? Well, if you're fighting in a tournament, I want you to go and just swing a stick. All right? When you're fighting in practice, when you're doing your training, which is the 3 levels, there's your training, which is outside of practice. There's your practice, which is your practicum, where you're working on what you've trained. And then there's your tournament fighting, which is the end result of the time and the effort that you put in before that. Okay? So, the other part of that, like I said, is, you know, your personal fitness, which I'm not the greatest example of. That's not my good side for the camera. But underneath, I like to think of myself as a finely marbled piece of prime rib, you know. Under all that fat is some really delicious meat. So your fitness is part of that, and that's the work and the training and the time that you do. It's not just your time in armor, it's your time out of armor. All of us come to this game with different skills and different gifts and different levels of physicality. So, you know, we have to apply that, but we have to constantly be plugging away and working on that as well. The other thing that we're going to talk about today is Pell work and the importance of doing that. Now, I know some guys that they've never done Pell work, they think it's just crap and they're great fighters, and that's fine. They've gotten their skills in other ways. But if you're someone who lives a long distance, 3 hours from the closest practice to you, and maybe some guys are going to show up and maybe they're not going to show up, you know, you have to take charge of your own training. And that means putting the work in outside of these occasional Saturdays, Sundays, Thursday nights, whenever you fight. So your approach to your practice, when you get to practice, is that you should use any time that you spend in armor as a precious resource. Okay? So when I was coming up, sometimes people thought I was aloof or cold at practices. It didn't have anything to do with that. It's that I only had so much mental focus, and that mental focus was going to be on the fight and the training that I was doing. So, you know, your social time happens before, your social time happens afterwards. Maybe if you can be in that relaxed mind state, your social time happens in between if you're really relaxed and that doesn't screw you up. I'm not saying be so tight and so focused that you can't enjoy yourself. You can't suck the love out of what you're doing, okay? You gotta treasure it and value it. But part of treasuring and valuing it is being serious about it when you're actually doing it. So we've talked a little bit about the progression of looking at yourself, looking at your training, and then going to practice and how you approach that practice mentally. You know, what is my goals? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So setting practice goals, all right? When you go to a practice, do you just go to fight? Do you go to that practice because you've been training something on your Pell or even in your mind, you know, thinking about something? What's your goal when you go into practice? Do you have a goal? Most of you guys, do you have a goal when you go to it, or is it just a fight? Most of you is just a fight, right? And that's fine. That's an approach and a way to do it. But in my experience, when fighters want to get progressively better than they are now, they have to use this mindful approach and set goals for themselves. So what are some examples of some things that you can do better? Anybody have any examples of things they want to try to do better in practice? Like
Trusting.
Okay. Something I've been working on the last couple years.
Blocking shots.
Right. Or, you know, I fight this guy in my practice every week, and God hits me in the shoulder every week. You You know, one of my motivators when I tell a short story, when I first started, Duke Ragnar, he's our king right now. He's my squire brother. And when we lived in the barony together, we weren't the tightest of friends back then. And he was an experienced fighter, and he was working really hard on trying to get better. And I was brand new. And Ragnar's a left-handed fighter, and my knight was left-handed. Some of my other squire brothers that were left-handed. So I have learned, you know, the evils of wrong-handedness, and I made it my crusade. I have brought a hammer. It was extra part of my baggage fee, but if there's anyone here who's left-handed who needs me to fix that for them, see me after. I have a great training method for that. But Ragnar, we would fight, and Ragnar was training how to throw a scorpion around. And if it gets to this, the raft that comes up, and then it comes back down this way, okay? So every week, when I first started, I have a bruise right here on my shoulder. And I had this big mirror in my house, and I looked at the mirror very seriously every day when I got up the next morning. So this huge mass of purple contusion, no shoulder armor, you know, nothing there. And I would say, next week that son of a bitch is not going to hit me in the shoulder. And the next week he'd hit me in the shoulder, next week. Eventually, over time, Ragnar didn't hit me in that shoulder anymore. Then he started hitting this shoulder. So then the next one's like, next week he's like, and then after a while, Ragnar didn't hit me in the shoulder anymore. So, you know, you have to, even a small goal, something that's punishment you're receiving, that can be a goal of yours. I'm going to block all these guys' shots and go completely defensive tonight. There's a hole in my defense. How do I address that? And that's where you turn to trainers, and we'll talk about that. So set goals for yourself. Don't just go out there and swing a stick. You know, you can do that, and that's fine. And there's times for just fighting, and we'll talk about that too. But the more mindful approach that you put into it, I think the quicker gains you're going to see. And if you think about it, that's how any sport is. Is there NFL players, they just go out and play games when they're training all week long? No, they're doing drills, they're doing scrimmages, they're working through their routines. You know, the running back has a very specific job. The lineman has a very specific job. And everything that they do with their coaches and their trainers is geared around working that system. Okay, and that's a team sport, not an individual sport. But talk to a boxer. You know, boxers spar, but how much time do boxers spar versus how much time they're doing speed bag, and how much time they're doing footwork, and how much time they're running, and how much time they're weightlifting and swimming. You know, you have to approach this as an art if you want to get better at it. There's no other sport in the world where people just throw on gear and go out and fight on Sundays and they call that good for their training. It just doesn't happen. So one of the things that I do and that helps me is, so I go into practice, I have my goals, maybe I accomplish those goals, maybe I don't. I go home, we go out to dinner at our practice. I go home, I get an ice pack of some sort, maybe some heat, and I have a fighting journal. And I've been keeping that journal since about a year before I was knighted. And I have a little book that my wife gave me. I just filled out the first one, and I'm starting the second one now after about 10 years. And it's very brief, okay? I write the date. I rate the practice like we're fighting in Tim's backyard, or we're fighting Caramere practice, which is the barony that I live in, okay? I go through my mind, how many fighters were there? Sometimes that's hard, but who was there this week? Was it this guy? Who did I fight? Who didn't I fight? Okay, there were 8 fighters and I fought 6 of them. This guy's arm broke. This other guy doesn't want to fight me because we fight each other every week, okay? So then I list those 6 fighters, and I break it down real simply by percentage. How do I feel I did in that fight? That doesn't necessarily mean win-loss. It means who was in control of that fight, and was I accomplishing the goal that I set for myself, okay? If my goal is my defense, and I go out and I fight Sir Cedric, and I boom, I kill him with a flat snap or whatever, but I never work on my defense, that's going to lower my percentage. That's how I approach it. Other people do it different ways. I just use a 100% scale. Me and Godric fought. You know, we went 50-50. I feel we were pretty evenly matched. Or maybe the next week I'll look and say, Godric's 55, 60% on my 40. I really feel like he had a slightly, this week this guy dominated me, 90%. Nothing is working, none of my plans were working. What do I need to do to adjust? So the good thing about that is, the side benefits are, you get to look back over time and see how you're doing against people, and see the decisions that you're making, and are these decisions going in the right track? If I'm fighting someone and I see that my number's going way, way down, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm screwing up in my training. It may just mean that in that particular fight, working on my leg defense is not a good idea with someone who has an excellent head wrap. You know, so maybe I'm losing that fight, but maybe I'm getting better in my training. Or maybe it means I need to right the ship and do something different. Some of the other things that I track are progression of other fighters. These are sort of side benefits that have come out of this. The number of practices that we attend. You know, all the time I talk to unbelts and to squires, and they're like, man, why am I not a knight? Why am I not a knight? And I'm like, you don't fight enough. And they get really kind of butthurt about it, and I go, okay, well, let's go back to the book, and let's look at my book. I was at 35 practices this year. You were at 8. How are you going to get better at something if you only are putting, 8 nights out of 365 into it? One of the coolest things about these books that I've been keeping is that I can watch guys come in, and I can see them become nuts over the course of years. A new guy shows up, and he has a tremendous physical skill. He used to be a boxer, X, Y, Z, but at the same time, over time I see, okay, well, he becomes a squire, and he starts winning tourneys, and he gets knighted here, and he wins a crown. I've seen that over 10 years, so it's a really cool side effect. It's not really something for yourself, but it's really gratifying as a trainer. Train sprains, you're going to have braces that you have to wear for those things. I have tendinitis in my wrists, my elbows, and my shoulders, and that was diagnosed about 6 months before I was knighted, and that was a real turning point for me because that was the decision to go on or stop. Okay, I had a lot of other injuries. I had knee problems, I had back problems, I had back surgery about 2 years ago. All those things happen based around my physicality and just the march of time. Okay, but over time I can track and see how am I hurting my knee? What was I doing that night? What was I doing that was extending that knee? So part of one of the greatest things that you can have to push yourself is a partner and a group of partners. Okay, there is no way that I can understress how important Squire Brothers and co-trainers and fighting households are to helping you, to encouraging each other, to having a brotherhood, to building a culture of fighting where it's important to have someone who kicks your ass and someone whose ass you can kick. And I don't mean just fighting, I mean someone who calls you up and says, hey man, get your gear, I'm picking you up in 10 minutes and we're going to this practice. Okay? That's how you get better. I've been very fortunate in my time in the SCA that I had a long line of guys who were like-minded. We all wanted to get better. Yeah, we had a rivalry, and yeah, we were friends, but the important part wasn't that, is that we worked as a group. And so, there's success in that. I lived with 3 other squires when I was a bachelor. All 4 of us are knights now. We're all knights because we all encourage each other to get up off the couch and stop eating Cheetos and go play racquetball and go off nights or hit this practice out of town and impress these other knights. Okay? So that's a real benefit that you have that you need to try to approach, whether it's just the fighters in your local group, whether you're in a household, whether you have a trainer. You have to seek instruction, not just from the best fighter in your area or your knight. You need to get back to that a la carte approach and seek all kinds of instruction, and take and leave. I mean, sometimes you're going to get advice from people that's just it's complete crap. But you have to be nice and say thank you for your time and try to work it through. Sometimes, like I said, the fault is in you. It's not in the fighter who's expressing it. But one of the most important things that I tell my guys is work with everybody. Even if it's a concept that we've tried a million times, go over and talk to this knight over here, or this fighter over here, this squire over here, and learn this concept. Because everyone has an individual approach to how they teach and how they train. And I may say, you move your foot like this, and you throw the blow like this. And I've told them a million times. And they're not getting it. And then they go and they talk to Logan, and Logan says, oh, I close my hand this way. And that's the light bulb, because what their brain needs to hear is I close my hand this way, or I move my hip this way, or whatever that is. So it's really important to seek out that instruction and grab whatever you can and leave out what doesn't work for your body. Your progression as a fighter, I believe, is tied to your sweat equity. Okay, so it's how much time you put into it. I know very few guys who got good, really good, fighting 1 time a week, fighting once a month. Most of the guys have a period in their life when they're able to do it, where they're fighting at least 2 times a week, and then they're doing all that training work outside of the fight. And that's what's important, and that's your daily work. And also those guys all had to look at themselves and be honest with themselves about what was working and what wasn't. Part of that is you run into plateaus. You're going to be doing great for a while, and then you're going to stay at that level. And other people are going to raise up above you, and the stuff that you were doing wasn't working. It was working, now it's not working anymore. So that's a natural part of that process. And part of getting good is staying consistent and pushing through those plateaus. And I mean, that's one way that I've overcome mine. There's different ways. I'll give you some examples. There was a point where I was an unbelt, and I was a squire for about 4 or 5 years, and then I was laureled, and I was a laurel for about 4 or 5 years, and about 10 years in I got knighted. But The period between when I was Laurel and when I was 90 was very difficult because the household tradition in my household was if you're a peer, you're not fealty to another peer. We had the belief that no man can have two masters. And that was proven to me very quickly because the king told me to do one thing and my old knight told me to do something else, and they were two very different things. So I learned that that was correct for me. It's not correct for other people. They have their traditions. That was ours. But for me personally, that was a pretty dark time in my fighting career because I felt rudderless. I had been part of a very active household. I'd had squire brothers. Now there was this weird self-created distance between me and them and between me and my knight. And so I was kind of rudderless for a while. And I was also trying to figure out who I was as a peer and, how I wanted to be in the SCA instead of just being squire, and being a role. So that was a different time for me individually. But I was in a dark time then because I was going to my practice, and I could beat up all the guys at my practice, and I could beat up all the new guys, which is a pretty horrible thing to do because then you don't have any new guys coming in. But I could do that, but I wasn't learning anything. And Duke Girth, who's one of our big names out in Atlantia, who sadly passed away, he wrote me and he said, Byram, when you're beating these guys up, are you doing everything perfectly? Is your technique that we've worked on perfectly? Is it perfect? Or is it just you're beating them up because they're not as good as you are? And I had to sit and think about it, and I was like, I'm sloppy as hell. No wonder when I go to tourneys, I go out there and I get dusty. I'm not working on the little things. So that was what helped me push through some plateaus. And so I always try to keep that in mind whenever I feel like I'm hitting a point where my fighting is stagnant. I think, what small thing can I fix? What am I doing with my feet? What am I doing with where I'm holding my hand? And so that would be my new goal. That resets the whole process. Other people have different ways that they push through plateaus. Some of that is like Count Amos, who's one of the fighters from my practice. He originally started in Taib. He came here, he was doing reasonably well. He fights a sword leg forward, center grip, kite style. But he really felt like he wanted to kind of bump up to the next level. He had gotten to the point where he was fighting well, but nothing was increasing. So what worked for Amos, that shield was held in a center grip. He pulled out his bucklers, which are a big part of his style anyway, because he's trained with a lot of I-33 stuff, and tried to apply that manual to SCA fighting. And he spent a year fighting buckler, okay? And at the end of that year, he was knighted. So, because he was going out in Atlantia, we fight, my shield is small for Atlantia, okay? So we fight with these big heater shields. 24 by 36 is a very standard style, maybe a little bit thinner, a little bit longer, but roughly that shape. And he was going out fighting these big old boys with just this little dinner plate, And his footwork, off the chart. His movement, tracking blows, all that stuff jumped up. And not that he wasn't a great fighter before that, but putting himself in a situation to change it up was. But at the same time, when he went to going back to the center grip, now it's just a slightly larger buckler, and he doesn't have to make the movements quite so big. But his footwork is better. So that was one thing that helped him move through plateaus. Just different examples. Some guys change out weapons. Some guys don't. For the intel that I've gotten on you guys do a whole lot of sword and shield and a whole lot of nothing else. And that's a lot how our kingdom is too. But sometimes you need to have a different example. I have a squire, and he fights in a closed face horseman's helm. It's a sugar loaf helm, and he has the big Atlantean heater. And we were training one day, and I said, Balin, my hand is here. I was like, can't you see what I'm doing? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I realized that from here down, and he's got breath holes. But between the shield and the way he was standing and blocking, he couldn't see this. He had no idea this was a whole part of the universe. I was talking to a guy at practice last week who was fighting in a closed face helm, same thing. He said, when you're down here, I can't see anything. I don't know where it's at. So you have to train yourself around those things, and you have to find those. So for him, I said, great, you're going to fight buckler and you're going to fight two-sword. I think two-sword was an abomination and an aberration against God, but personally, but you know what?
Hallelujah.
My squire started fighting two-sword, and I started fighting two-sword with him to train. And it's improved his fight because now he can see.
We told our two-stick fighter he had to move to a different kingdom. See you, Creppin.
You didn't sit there until later. So those are different approaches. Everybody's going to have different ways that they get through that stuff. Pell work, I'm going to talk in that real, I'm going to tell you how I do pell work, and I'm going to use some examples, even though we don't have a pell in here, we have squires, and those are just as good. So I do my pell work a lot differently than they did historically, and how a lot of people do their pell work. Because of repetitive stress injuries, a lot of people set up a pell, and it's an unpadded pell, and they just knock the hell out of it. And I think that's a really horrible idea for long-term joint health, okay? At least pad the thing. You know, put carpet on, put padding on, do whatever you're going to do. And my particular philosophy for Pell work is I never strike the Pell hard, okay? When I'm training with a Pell, I'm training my technique, or I'm working on my movement, or I'm doing different things. I never just go out there and unmindfully do my Pell work, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about. You know, your mental preparation for the Pell work. I just don't go out and just mindlessly throw 100 blows, okay? I go out with a plan. Today I really want to work on thrust because I'm tired of getting thrusted in the face and I got to figure out how to make that stop happening. I need to understand how the blow is thrown so that I can process it and block it, all right? So I will develop, before I fight, I will get in a mindful state where I'm focused on what I'm doing. I'm not doing other stuff. I'm not thinking about dinner. I'm not thinking about something to do to the house. And I'm going to make a little plan at some point during the day when I'm driving or whatever. Today I'm really going to work on leg line wraps. I really need to focus a Pell routine around that. And I'll build a little training exercise for myself around that. So all that time is mindful. So I use a soft Pell. And mine was made out of necessity. Much like you guys get a lot of rain out here, you know, if you don't have a nice big barn or a garage or unfinished space that you can put a Pell in, or your wife doesn't want you to have a Pell in the house, you know, I got one of my daughter's pool noodles, and I took a bungee cord and I attached it to a ceiling fan in my man cave area, and I took some electrical tape, just like I learned how to do on a Pell, and I did my target areas. There's my brow line and eyes, you know, here's the lower part, here's the shoulder, you know, here's the hips, here's the knee and the area above the knee that I'm being trained for on that little pool noodle. And I actually use a soft sword, very similar to the ones that were lent to me here. Mine is actually, I meant to bring it, but I just ran out of travel space. Mine is actually a kid's toy that I picked up at Pentic. It's like a padded stick. So the combination of those two things forces me to be very mindful of my technique, because in my experience, it's a lot easier for me personally to throw sloppy when I'm throwing with a lighter stick. Okay, I cheat the technique. A heavier stick, it forces me to throw the technique correctly, or I'll hurt myself. You know, a light stick, it's a lot easier to just get away with slop. That's just me personally and how I fight. So I've developed my Pell work with a light sword, with a soft Pell. The other thing about that arrangement is the Pell moves when I strike it, like a fighter moves. So, but I'm not moving it fast to the point where it does that. And then one of the other things, and we'll talk about this. I'm just going to show you real quick. You're my example for that. So you're my Pell, and you can move your hand up because I want to work on. Let's say I want to work on a leg blow. So I want to figure out how to hit him with a leg blow. All right, and I want to hit him in that leg back there. Okay. So if I throw just any kind of leg blow, say I throw this type of leg blow right here. All right, look where it's hitting. It's the end of the tip of the blow. It's not going to be a good shot. It's not going to be a good shot. It's not going to transfer force correctly. So the first thing that I know is I've got to get closer to where that target is, and my arm can't be extended here unnaturally. It's got to be a natural position of where I want to throw. Okay? So this is what I call reverse engineering the blow. You're starting at the end, or which is really the halfway point, because your return is more important than the blow that you throw. But you're starting where you're at. Now, I don't really want to throw it right here, because I have a feeling he probably has a shield, right? So am I going to hit his leg with that shield there? No. So really, maybe I need to be here. So when I start that Pell, I do one of two things. I start here, and I reverse engineer the blow back. I reverse the flow of the blow back to where I want it to be. And then I move, I think, okay, this is where my feet need to be. So maybe I'll throw a couple just here. And then I got to think about approaches, because he's not going to just let me get there, right? So maybe I want to take a real wide lateral lunge, step over and throw, okay? That's going to angle the blow. Or maybe I want to be in defensive, because I know that he likes to hit me in the leg too, and I'm going to do a squat dip and step and throw, okay? So I think about all that stuff before I do it, and then I set up the example thinking. I can set up the example based around that. So that's more that mindful fighting, that's the reverse engineering. So we have a couple other drills we're going to do out of here for time. One of those is a new one that I picked up from Duke Paul, and it's cutting through the target. We'll discuss that when we start doing slow work. I will practice as part of my Pell work blocking. All right. I know a lot of guys do their Pell work, and they're just like, "I'm an offensive god," and they never think I have to move my shield in between these blows, or this guy's going to take my head off. Right? It's totally useless like that. So the way that I do my Pell work is I have blocked a shot, and then I have stepped and thrown. I have blocked a shot, and then I have stepped and thrown, whatever I'm going to do. So that's part of my pillow work as well. The other thing that we've been using as a device is this thing called the century drill. I know some of you guys are doing that. Do you know what I'm talking about when I talk about that? It's basically a challenge that you set yourself with a group of people that you promise to hit your bell 100 times every day for 100 days. All right? You don't have to do the same thing. You can change it up. So it's a really good training technique. One day it's leg wraps. One day it's combinations. One day it's movement. Those are all different things that I do with that drill. And that's been really, really good. The most important thing you can do for your fighting is travel. It's the best thing for your SCA group. It's the best thing for your personal fighting. It's the best thing for your household. Travel. Fight other fighters that fight different styles. Fight fighters from other kingdoms. Work with them on the pickup field. Don't drive, a culmination of 18 hours to fight for 45 minutes. Your practice time, your helmet time is extremely valuable. That's the gift that you're giving yourself, and that's the gift that you're giving your brothers and sisters in arms. So take that time to work with someone. If you know someone has a busy schedule, say, Sir Godric, can you please spend 5 minutes with me working on something? I really need your time, and talk to them early. And most nights that I know, it's absolutely no problem, let's do it. Okay? And then stay on them. Don't let them wander off the way knights do and start drinking beer. Make them do the work with you.
That never happens.
So we talked a little bit about small groups encouraging each other, motivating, trying to build a healthy culture of arms within your group, and how that helps you. So I'm just going to skip over that part we've already talked about. All right, we are 25 minutes in. The next part is training technique, how to coach, how to teach, and then focus practices and practice tournaments. So you've done your prep work. You've worked with instructors, you've figured out your weaknesses, you've drilled that on Pell, you've thought about, yeah.
Can I ask you a question before you go on?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's say you're the opposite of what you say, right? Like you are so critical on yourself that you can't see the good. So how do you balance that?
That's part of what you need a trainer for and you need a coach for, especially a coach. And I break trainers and coaches into two different things. And in the SCA, there's a whole lot of trainers and there's very few coaches. Right? Coaches are motivators, and that's about what we're about to talk about right now. So I think it'll dovetail really well. So we can't stress how important teaching and coaching are to grow the sport, right? Everyone's got to be a teacher. It's not just the knights, it's not just the dukes, it's not just the squires. I mean, it's every fighter. Every time you fight, you're learning something, okay? So you owe it to yourself and to all your brothers and sisters in arms to become a teacher and to become a trainer, all right? Even if you don't know what the hell you're doing, start to talk to people who do and try to absorb things like a sponge. Because if you don't do that, the sport is going to wither and die. The guys that are here in front of you, they're not going to be here forever. We're getting old, all right? You need a new generation to come after us. And the way that happens is you put the time in to encouraging and teaching each other. So it's not just for the chivalry, it's for everybody. So the role of trainers versus the role of coaches versus teaching. It's kind of like turning versus practice, like we talked about. So teachers or trainers, they have certain things that they do. So what you're looking at is someone an instructor or is someone a mentor? Sometimes someone's a mentor to you, and they can give you a mental push in a way, or a spiritual push in a way, that'll help you that necessarily doesn't have to do with fighting, but it has to do with your mind and how you approach fighting, okay? So it's very important to seek out those people as well. And then it gets back into, are you fighting the knights, or are you getting the knights to teach you? Are you pushing them? Because when the knights show up, they're just going to put on their gear and they just want to hit you. That's fine. Let them do that. And then after you get hit, say, all right, sir, how'd you hit me in the leg? Most guys are going to tell you how they do. Well, you step like this, you duck your shield. Every time I fight you, you do this. Every time. So I hit you in the leg. I'm hoping that I hit you in the leg enough times that you'll realize that you're blocking this and maybe you'll lose and we'll have a better fight. But unless you ask the question, you're never going to get an answer. So that's one thing to think about. So what do good teachers do for their students? They mentor them, okay? They encourage them through those bad times. Whenever everybody talks about the shit sandwich, pardon my language, but you have the compliment and the loaf of shit and then the compliment on the other side. It's very important to encourage your fellow fighters, especially your students. If you are 100% negative all the time, you're going to drive someone away. And they're going to shut down, and the only thing they're going to hear is, I suck, man, I suck, God, I suck, I wish I could be as good as this guy who's really telling me how much I suck. So I talk a little different to the guys that I train. I'll say, hey brother, I really like your intensity today and I love the things that you're doing. You have a really, really great leg blow. And it's outstanding. I think you should try to change it up and throw some more head blows. let's work on how to move your feet to make that more valuable for you. Because I feel like after you throw that leg blow, you kind of plant, you don't know what to do. 9 times out of 10, because I have that mindful approach to fighting, and I've watched them fight, and they go, yeah, I do that. You know, and so then that moves us into a situation where we can work together. And part of it's just being a regular person, just being nice to people. I mean, you know, you've got to have that, you know, there's a certain camaraderie that comes from the life in arms, and we all experience that together in this in some small way. We're not real soldiers, but we play at being, you know, men and women in combat. So we build that esprit de corps together, and it should be a mentoring point to jump off of. What do good teachers do? They learn to adapt their technique to the student who is in front of them. And encouragement, which we just talked about. And what I mean about that is, one thing I found once I became a knight and I started to train squires versus training students, which are two separate things but are similar. Everybody comes to this sport with their own benefits and with the things that they do poorly, okay? And if I say, you know, this is my dogma, I step like this, and if you're going to fight just like me, you got to move this way, you got to throw these blows. Okay, technique is technique. I'm still going to say your power generation sucks. You got to work on that, okay? But that's different from saying you have to move your shoulder this way or you'll never throw a blow. That's ridiculous. Your shoulder is different from mine. You're 5'6". I'm 6'2". You know, the angles of the sword are coming in from different places. So part of being a teacher is trying to figure out, well, why doesn't this thing that I do work for this other guy? I have a student who's our prince right now, and he was my squire. And all the time, we would have these run-ins where we train. I'm like, man, just move like this and hit him. And he would do it. And it just wouldn't work. And he's like, well, what if I do it like this? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's basically the same thing, that'll work. Well, I'm this tall, and he's about that tall, all right? So it makes a huge difference. And that was one of the breakthroughs for me as a trainer going, I have to figure out how to get him to move his feet and move his arm differently than I do because I got height on him. So that's one of the things that good teachers look for. So how do you train people? There's individual mentoring, there's working with people, you know, individually there's working with groups of people, there's being adaptive, and then there's, part of being adaptive is understanding the type of fighter that you're dealing with. Some fighters are natural students of the art. They have the physicality, they have a sports background, they have something they come from, and some people are what I call pluggers, okay? Pluggers are the guys that just, they keep chugging along, you know. God help them, God love them, they're in the SCA, they love it, they don't have physical gifts, okay? I was a guy who didn't have physical gifts, you know, I had no physical background. I don't think marching band really counts as a physical background. Sports combat, I did do a lot of physical work, you know, I didn't know what to do once I got there. But my knight was a similar way, although he was a very gifted and talented fighter. You know, he was someone who it took daily practice. So I know about myself, if I want to maintain where I'm at, like Pavarotti said, I have to be consistent in my training. And if I want to get better, I have to double those efforts. Okay? So that's my type of personality. Some other types of personalities are phenoms. I just say, move your hand like this. Like, perfect, now do it 8,000 times. Great, you got it. Now let's move on to the next thing. You have to look at your own level of involvement and how much time you're going to put into it. You have to look at paying it forward, but you also have to balance that well and realize that your own training is important. And if you're not doing your own training in your own work, you can't help other people. You have to determine whether the type of teaching you want to do is private instruction or public instruction. We have our Burial Fighter practice we've had for many years on Tuesday night. It's a huge success. I have a role in that practice as a trainer, but my responsibility to my students, to my squires and the people who actually work with me is something different, and I'm assuming that they want a more intense level of encouragement and a more direct approach, which usually means more profanity in my case. But it also means that we have private practices, and that's not to exclude anyone. I will train anyone whatever they want. I love talking about SCA fighting, I love doing drills, I love fighting people, okay? But the people who are sworn to me, or the people who have come to me and said, Sir Bryce, I really need your help. Like, we have a guy in our group, phenomenal guy, polearm fighter. I cannot fight my way out of a wet bag with a polearm. I'm horrible with a polearm. But we've done specific drills, and it's forced me to become better at that style because I want to help him get better, okay? So, but that's a personal choice we make. We have a private practice, and I tell him, look, if you're coming to my practice, you're not screwing around. And we're going to run through the drills that we do or how we do our monthly practices. It's not just showing up and throwing on armor and fighting. You know, it's training. We're thinking about, I will set up a lesson plan throughout the week. I've set up one for today. all the drills will be progressive through that lesson plan to teach you a lesson. And then hopefully you can apply that to whatever you're doing. And throughout the week, I'm thinking, okay, Balin really needs to work on this, and Auburn really needs to work on this. What would be the best one of these drills that I know that can help both of them, so that I can increase my practice time and my success of that. There's something that I do that I learned about finding that's a little bit different from other guys. Cedric, can you stand up with me? So, Cedric is my student, and he needs to learn how to, no, go ahead, hold sword. That would be fine too, I like that better. But so he needs to learn how to throw a particular blow, whatever that blow is. Let's say it's it's an offside, just a regular offside pop, so its forward hand just comes this way, okay? So he needs to learn this blow, and this is what he needs to work on. Now, sir, would you come here for a second? So this is what I do at practice, especially when, go ahead and put that in whatever hand you hold and get your guard. So he's having a problem with that, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is you're going to be defensive. I know you want to hit him, but you're going to be defensive. So get your regular stance, all right? We want to work on trying to hit him. Now, the angle that he presents is the sword's got to cut this way, okay? And that's a really difficult one to do, all right? So we're going to go back to what I was talking about before, and we're going to reverse engineer that blow. So you get in your guard and you get to be the practice bell. You're going to move your body until you have that. Just get a little closer. Just reach the sword out and lay it right where you want the target to be. That's why we use the soft swords. And we also do this with helmets on. It's just my experience. That's where you want to be, where you're at the end. So now we're going to reverse engineer you. And so this is the other thing that's different that I do, is that I touch my students and I tell them, I'm going to put my hands on you. And is that okay? It's like some kind of weird like prison thing. I'm going to touch your elbow now. Is that okay? I'm going to move your head. But they know that from the beginning, so that they know that I'm trying to help them move their body. So let's reverse engineer. You get your guard. You put the sword there. All right. And let's just lay the sword on them, just like you've thrown the blow. Yeah, well, you get a little closer. Wherever it feels comfortable to you, get the blow perfect. That's where you want to be right there, right? All right, and you see where the threat target is there. So we're going to reverse the blow back. So stay in that spot. Let's say you're throwing it from close range. So let's stay in that spot there. You've got to figure out how to get there from there. So I will say, all right, I want you to be comfortable, and I want you to relax this arm and let me move it, okay? And then I'm going to move his arm and sword on the track that I want. I'm going to move his hips on the track that I want. And I'm going to move his hips first and say, okay, we got a hip here. I want you to just relax, and when you feel pressure, you go with it. Okay? So that's one of the things, guys. That's one of the things that I teach. I move their bodies into the position. And the reason why I started doing that was wrap shots. I kept finding that guys were having real problems throwing wraps. It's a difficult blow. And they just weren't, there's something about a wrap, like when you throw it correctly, you know that you've thrown it correctly, right? And then if you throw it off, you know you've thrown it off. But until you've thrown it correctly, you have no idea what correct feels like. So by moving those guys over and over, whatever the type of wrap it is that I'm throwing, by moving their body, they start to feel the flow of it. And they're like, oh, this moves first, then this comes around, or it's this type of wrap here, or whatever the wrap is. And so once they feel it right, I'm like, you feel that? And every single time they go, yes, that's it, I feel it. Right? There's that light bulb moment. And once we do that, I go, okay, let's do it again. I see them cheating something. They start cheating their shoulder before I want to see. I say, stop. Did you move your shoulder? And if they're being mindful and they're being in the right space, they'll go, nope, I screwed up. Most of the time, they'll catch it themselves. If not, I'll say, that one was all right. Did you lift your foot on that? And they'll go, shit. Okay, we got to re-drill it 10 more times correctly. So that's one thing that I found to be really successful with helping especially newer fighters or fighters work through a new blow or a new pattern of blows. All the time people will come to night and say, how do you throw that blow that you throw? And half the time they don't know how to do it, but if they do, they try showing it and it doesn't work because their body's different.
Just do this.
Right. if you move them through, it makes you a better, it makes you more proficient with it. You understand what you're doing now, and it just speeds up the process. It's so much quicker when you actually lay hands on people. So that's one of the things that I found out. Oxygen and learning. One of the things that I have experimented with recently is that it seems like a simple concept. If you can't breathe, you can't think. All right? So when you're working with somebody new, or you're just drilling concept, and they're not getting it, and they're getting more and more blown up, and you say, they're doing that stuff. And that's when you stop. That's when you take a break. Okay? So what we started doing in my practices is instead of pushing fight endurance, which we're going to talk about, and that's a different thing, we will shorten the time of a particular drill or a particular exercise or a particular blow if I start to see them get blown up, especially if we're in armor and we're fighting. I'll stop other people's fights in my practice and say, you're blown up. Let's take a minute and breathe. Not necessarily take your helmet off or get water or whatever, but just take a minute and breathe, all right? Because you can't learn when you can't breathe, you can't think. So now fighting endurance is different, and you have to do a cost versus benefit analysis of what pushing through gets you, okay? If you're working on your endurance because that's a problem, you need to be doing cardio work outside of armor. And then when you're fighting, you need to save that last little bit at the end of the night for your push time. Do you guys do that? Do you have your time that you, at the end of the night, you kind of blow it all out, or some guys call it crown turning rounds, or do any of you guys do that at your practices?
It happens without being said.
Yeah, because you're short on time, right? So, but make that a mindful thing, because that's a really good way to build that up. Now you have to be careful with that too, because you can push that too far and exhaust yourself, or end up with like heat exhaustion and things like that. But where I live with 98 degrees and 90% humidity, yeah, you go get hot. So take a break and move on. If you are instructing or learning and you just don't feel like you get something, take a break for a little bit, get some help. One of the most important tools, we're going to talk about tools a little bit, one of them is right there, and that's the harsh mistress, and that's video.
Oh,
You know,
not Misty.
Me too.
So you can lie to yourself all day long. You can look through that core mirror.
I'm feeling the love.
The video sees everything. The video sees every flaw, and it has no core reflection. It sees everything in crystal clear focus. Okay. So video is a tremendous tool for increasing your fight. One of the things that we've done with our training and with training other guys is we take a three-pronged approach to how we're doing this. We have the private practices where we do the drill work that I talked about. We have the public practices where we do the practice tournaments that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And then we have our individual Pell work and our training. So every month at our practice, we have 3-4 weeks out of the month, we just have regular fighter practices. Once a month, we do a monthly practice tourney. We stole this idea from the West. They've been doing Krapad forever. And then this happens in other parts of the known world too. But we do that monthly in our barony. And I run that tournament based on the number of fighters that we have. And we do that with a mindful approach of not only just fighting, you're going to be in the moment when you're fighting, but when you're watching other people fight, you're going to be learning. And at the end, we break it down with a round table. We talk about our strengths and our weaknesses and how we can get better, and we share with each other. And coming out of that approach of Pell work and training outside of practice, the private practices where we do drills, and then the public practices where we're doing that practice approach with the training tournament has helped a lot of fighters get a lot better, a lot quicker than they were doing before. So I recommend it. It may be something that will work better for your group depending on how you go. Part of what we do with monthly practice is it has prestige and it builds renown. You know, people want, even though it means nothing, even though it's just us fighting in a church parking lot or wherever we're at, people want to win that tournament because it's a progression of their skill. It's a goalpost that they've set. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, setting goals for themselves, okay? We also do it as a chivalry tournament. Every fighter watches every other fighter and finds something that inspires them. Everyone is responsible for giving me a name at the end of the night and saying, this person is so much better than they were doing last week, or this person offered a point of chivalry that I think was on point, or whatever that was. And, you know, we make a decision and we award that as well to get fighters thinking about more than just the fight, to think about the pomp and everything that's outside of just the fight, that builds into what we do at actual events. So that's basically that. I've talked about Scala, that's our monthly practice. I've talked about the practice tournaments, and we talked about the century drill. So I'm going to move into turning point when everybody's freezing. So equipment prep and its importance and maintenance, okay? Obviously, you're fighting in a tournament. This is the culmination of all this hard work that you put in there. Are you going to go in there with your stuff looking like crap? I mean, is your armor going to be falling off, held together with duct tape? Are you really taking it seriously? And are you? So you know that's the philosophy of being prepared and being relaxed. You don't have to worry that your leg armor is going to fly off in a million pieces because it's held together with shoestring and gum. You know, that's part of getting ready beforehand, making sure that your sword is in a condition where you don't have to question if your sword is pulped or not. You know whether the blow landed or whether it didn't land. Okay, so those are. I'm going to gloss over that stuff now. We can talk about it more if we want, but. Part of that is the daily meditation, thinking about your fighting, thinking about things that you want to work on. watching film, YouTube is a phenomenal resource when you're bored at work and you have 5 minutes, or when you're just chilling out. Hope my boss doesn't see that, but you know, YouTube is really good for that. That's a tremendous tool. Watching other people fight, trying to figure out what they do. I love watching the answer videos that you guys put up and seeing all the different fighting styles. Different from what we do, it's similar to what we do, and it just makes me think about fighting. So I go into my fight thinking about it. I may not change my fight, but I've had my mind, a certain portion of my mind, working towards my art during each day. Different things, hydration. Drinking water right before the tournament, too late. You're done, and you guys probably understand that. The food that you put into your body, you know, the water that you put into your body before you're filling up those cells and making them perform to the best. You don't want to put in all this time, this mental effort, this anguish, time away from your family, whatever you're doing, and then, you know, blow yourself out the night before getting drunk, and then go out and fight like crap. I have done that many times.
I thought that was training.
Yeah, well, that goes back into your preparation. You want to make sure that your liver is up to the amount. But there's some sports techs out there. I mean, a lot of you guys, you're wearing the wicking fibers and stuff. That stuff helps. You know, under the modern layers, linen obviously helps. But also the sports tech. My wife is a runner, and I've been stealing technology from running over the last 2 years like crazy. It's amazing. Like, if you don't have technical socks, go get technical socks. My God, it's the best thing to have socks that when you stop fighting, you don't have wet feet. They just don't magically evaporate. It's like the best thing I've ever felt. I love it. They have these disgusting things. I have one of them here. It's called a goo. And they're these little things that runners use that are little calorie packs that are just nasty. They're horrible, and they come in all kinds of horrible flavors. And I'm not gonna lie, they jokingly call them spunk. And my guys hate them when I make them give them. But long day at Estrella or at Penzic, and you can't get food. And if you're like me, if you're like me, I can't eat when I fight. You know, a doctor told me one time. He said, your body is pumping blood through the system. The blood can either go to your brain, it can go to your muscles, or it can go to your stomach to digest. Okay? So when I eat and I fight, I puke. Happens every time. I know if it's a real long day, I can maybe have an orange, a little bit of bread, maybe some olives, some pickles and stuff. Beyond that normal water bear stuff that we have, I don't know if you guys do that or if you're just on your own. Beyond that stuff, there's no way. I don't sit down. You know, I have a big breakfast beforehand, but when I'm fighting, I can't eat steak and eggs. That stuff will be through my grill. And the helmet I have, it's like a soup strainer. So I use the goos sometimes on long days. They're just energy sometimes with caffeine, just to keep you going. A lot of guys do the sports drinks. I don't like the sports drinks because there's so much weird stuff in them, and there's just way so much caffeine that sometimes it pushes them too far. But the goos are nice. Sometimes they have caffeine, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have sugar, sometimes they don't. They have vitamins in them. There's just a little supplement. Gatorade, everybody does it. There's a better technology than Gatorade, and it's called NUN, N-U-U-N, okay? And it's made for runners, and it's like an Alka-Seltzer. You drop it in the water, it tastes 1,000,000 times better. It doesn't have all the crap in it that Gatorade has, and it hydrates you quicker. I don't have it in here, but you can find it online. Look it up. It's really phenomenal stuff.
Coconut water.
Coconut water is my new thing. I've started doing that. It is disgusting. I have tried all flavors. It's
Great diuretic.
Yeah, it is a great diuretic, but it does help. Yeah.
Post-workout, post-lifting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you know, absolutely. There's a compound you can get at GNC called L-glutamine or L-glutamine. You mix that in your protein shake. It helps with the delayed muscle onset soreness. It's a huge benefit for that. So those are all different things. You know, use that stuff. Use the modern sports technologies out there. If you need help with your coaching, there's a program called Coach's Eye that you can use to put on your video. It's a tremendous thing to use. If you need help with your fitness, there are tons of things out there. There's My Fitness. One that my wife and I use is called Daily Mile. We've set up a community of other Skadians that run and walk, and we track our progress. And I'm competitive, so when I see that my wife ran 20 miles, I get out of my chair and I hobble around on the block.
About 20 yards.
But it pushes me. It's called dailymile.com. It's easy. There's a fitness site called loseit.com for tracking your calories. You can put in your exercise. So if I really want a glass of bourbon, I know I have to run 2 miles because I won't go over my calories for the day. One of the most important things, and we're going to gloss on this because I know you guys are freezing to death, but you want to try to develop your fight computer. And what I mean by that is the way that you keep fighting when you watch a fight. A great way of doing that is marshalling, as much as it sucks and no one really wants to do it. We all want to be out there fighting. Watching other fighters objectively will increase your knowledge on those fighters, your knowledge of fighting, and also your knowledge of yourself. we can talk more about that later. I want to get into the drills because we're mostly clean. Part of that is reading your opponent. So in a tournament, I don't just look, I mean, you know, real simple things like, are they left-handed? You know, did God curse them with that affliction? Did I bring my hammer? No, I didn't bring my hammer. Okay, so I got to fight a lefty. So, you know, do they have a Madu, or what are they holding? The knob's turning. When I first knobbed, my knight was left-handed, my squire was left-handed. My first loss, left-handed. Blanked me. I never knew he was left-handed. I laid on the ground, I looked up at him, and I was like, son, bitch, how could I let that happen? Because I wasn't mentally in that moment. I wasn't paying attention to that. Pay attention to your opponent's gear, okay? So one of the reasons why you want to retape your sword before tournaments is one, to make sure it's in good shape so it doesn't break on you. Two, to make sure that it's not crushed and the rattan is bottomed out so that when you hit somebody, you're like, why aren't any of my blows good? Well, you know, you got a broomstick for your gear, all right? And then the third reason is kind of tricky. It's like, I just retape the front of that. So where does Bryce throw his blows? On the front of his sword? I don't know. Sword's brand new. Where does Bryce throw on the back of his sword? I did this so you guys can see. You can see.
It's in the center.
It's kind of varied. When does he throw flat? Hey, look, quite a lot. So, you know, make sure you press the dips and good repair. But when I'm fighting somebody and they're in their guard and their sword's there, you know, this isn't when we're fighting, but this is when the heralds are doing their thing, the marshals are getting set up. You know, what kind of armor are they wearing? You know, how big is their shield? Where are the bolts on their shield? Okay? This is my shield. My shield's covered, and when it's painted and it's in good shape, it's really hard to see the bolts. You can still see them. Why are those bolts important?
Yeah.
The bolts are where my hand is, right? And that's a focal. I can move there. I can move it on the elbow there. All right? So if I'm going to do any press attacks, I want to know where the bolts are. If it's a center grip, where are they holding it? Have they offset it and it's a little bit lower? Those are all things you can check. And that's real simple stuff you can do while you're in that relaxed mind state to help you become a better fighter. I'm going to show you a couple of things. I'm going to skip some of this and we'll work on it later when we're doing stuff. But you want to train for the top 1% of fighters, not the bottom 99% of fighters. Okay, you have a gadget and you have a trick and you have a thing that works against the guys at your practice, and you go out and you fight your king and he dusts you and you never get to land it all day long. Is it an effective technique for you?
No.
Not yet. Not until you learn how to do it against the 1%. So that's a goal. It goes back to, well, shit, that offside doesn't work. What do I need to do to make it work? Start swinging back over. Go to my coaches. Go to my trainers. Go to my coaches. You saw me fight. What did I do? Your feet were wrong. Crap. Okay. Go to my trainers. I'm having a problem with my footwork when I throw an offside. Can you help me? Let's work on that. Can you watch my feet tonight when we fight, sir? Can you watch my feet and see if they're in the right place? Can you stop me if they're in the wrong place? Mindful fighting. All part of the approach. Intimidation, eye feints, misdirection. We're going to leave that out and talk about that in some of the other parts of the practice. But there's a real basic philosophy is I want to watch my opponent's hand. I want to watch my opponent's sword. Why? Because the sword's what's going to kill me. You know, hopefully they're not going to kill me with the shield. That's ACL. That's a whole different kind of thing. They're going to kill me with the sword. Okay. So I want to know where their sword is at all times. And so we're going to do some drills on how to hide your sword and how to read your opponent's sword. Cycling and timing, we'll talk about that too. Measure, and we'll also talk about the pace of a fight, fighting off the beat. And we're going to talk about lateral movement today. These are all the things that I've set up. And we're lateral movement to set up vectors of attack. You know, there's the best area that your sword, there's an arc that your sword can travel in. You want to get your feet in the best place. And a lot of times from what I've seen from Antirian fighters, at least from the guys that are on video, there's a style where your blows are coming in, and I feel like the guys who fight your style best are able to move this way really, really well. Okay? And they're able to move this way really well. Right? So that's one of the things we're going to work on today. I feel like we're running out of time. I know I'm blowing through this stuff pretty quick now, but I don't want to freeze you out. So speed is power, okay? But there's a power style and there's a speed style. They're two different things. Technique around the world is all the same, but how they choose to apply that technique can be very different. Some kingdoms, cultures don't want to be hit that hard and they don't want to throw that hard. It doesn't mean that their 1% fighters can't do that. They certainly can, but they choose not to, and that's their kingdom culture, okay? So that's something you're going to run into at inter-kingdom wars. Some kingdoms don't have a problem with that at all, and they'll just blast you. One of the really cool things about the SCA is just how regional it is, okay? It's all the same. Like last night we were hanging out, we were telling bullshit stories and all the rest of that. Same kind of stuff I've heard for 20, 30 years. Doesn't matter, we just change the stray for, Antier, Westwar, or Pennsic for Gulf Wars. All that's the same. But regionally, because of the pockets of activity in the SCA and the way the SCA is developed, you can tell a fighter from where they're from by their equipment. Okay? And a lot of that is based on cultural anthropology for that kingdom. What did their best fighters do in the early days of that kingdom? That will set a tone that will live in the kingdom for 35 years, and it won't change. Okay? There can be guys outside of that, but they're going to be an aberration. So it can help your fighting book and help train your fighting brain where fighters from Atlantia, in general, move like this. In general, their equipment is like this. Okay? So a lot of that is traced back to those early guys. One of the things we were talking about in the car is like the SCA, started in the West, and then there was the middle and the East, and then, Adenvelt and Antier. And those little groups were like pockets. It was like, if me and Godric, if I go over to Godric's house, I'm like, hey man, I have this cool new card game to show you. Okay, you play it with suites, kind of like hearts, but it has these special rules, and here's how we play. Boom, boom, boom. And I showed him the game, he's like, oh, this is great. So he goes to his squire, and he's like, hey man, I'm going to show you this game that Bryce showed me. It's really awesome. Let's start playing it, And okay, they're still playing with suites. They're still dropping hands the same way, but maybe he forgot that one thing that I said, or maybe he didn't understand it, or he interpreted it a completely different way, all right? That's how the SCA developed. And then there's just house rules, like you guys with the plane of the knees. That's your house rule. My kingdom doesn't have that, but I know that fighters from Antier fight that way. I know that I don't want to take advantage of that. And I know that when they're in my kingdom, they need to be informed, hey, we're going to step over your shoulder. Okay, we're going to break the plane of your knees and we're not going to move. Because that's how we fight here. So all of that plays into when you're fighting guys. So who's the most dangerous guy that you fight in a tournament? Who's the most dangerous guy?
Myself.
To be less specific and more generic, who's the most dangerous type of fighter? Is it the guy that you've never fought before? That he's unknown? Is it the new guy that might hurt you or do something weird? Is it the guy that you fight every week at practice?
No, it's yourself.
It's not? What if he's the guy that you fight every week at practice and he's been saving something for you for tournament? Then it's the guy at practice because, it's the guy in front of you, okay? Whoever says the guy in front of you, the most important fight is the fight in front of you, okay? It's the guy who's there, and you've got to be relaxed and focused and in that moment and not worry about where you're placed in the tournament. And if you beat this guy, you're going to beat that guy because first you got to beat this guy. So it can be the new fighter who does something funky, or it can be the experienced fighter who's been working out book on you. I know that Bryce always steps here and throws like this. So I'm going to step back and I'm going to pop him in the air. Never do it in practice, save it for tournament. So that stuff certainly happens. One of the things we're going to talk about later, because we have ran up on the time that I allotted for this, is ways to make tournaments special occasions. Like you said, you've invested all this part of your life into them. There's ways to do that. There's ways to fight well. And then there's ways to add more to it beyond just the fighting. And there's an example of the culture at arms. It doesn't matter whether you're a Viking. It doesn't matter whether you're a 12th century Crusader, whether you're a 14th century knight on a Shelashi. There are ways within the SCA to do deeds of arms. Deeds of arms can be quests. They can be quests that you set yourself on. I'm going to fight all the kings, the seated kings at Australia this year. I'm going to go to my trainer, who's probably my knight, and I'm going to say, sir, I want to set myself on this quest. Will you help me? Absolutely. Let's go. I will introduce you. I have that carte blanche to do that. They know who I am. This is my squire. My squire would like to fight you today. Can you save him a fight? Boom. Click that off. Can you grace him with some words in his book? Can you just talk to him about his fighting and how he can progress and get better? There's those types of quests. There are ones where you screw up and you get sent on a quest. And you have things to do. There are ones where your knight assigns a certain quest to you that may be fighting related or not. There are deeds of arms that you can choose to do. And there are challenges that you can choose to do. Some of the greatest fighting moments that I've ever had were things off to the side of the list field that didn't have anything to do with the big tournament that was going on. I fought in the tournament. I did what I needed to do there. And then I had my thing. One example was the Rose's Quest that I was set upon. When I was engaged to my wife, I asked her if I could hold field in her honor for a certain set number of days. From the Tourney of the Mirror, which is the start of our tournament season and our biggest tournament in the kingdom, to the Gem Joust, which is Memorial Day weekend, which is sort of the other big tournament that's hosted by my group, and then we go hardcore into melee season to get ready for Penzic. That's our big tournament period from February to the end of May. Okay? At every event that I went to, and I traveled to an event every weekend, I held the field, I flew her arms in a banner, I gifted the fighters who bested me with roses for their ladies. They wrote us words of congratulation. My wife looked over those fights, and I fought in crowds, and I fought in big money tournaments, and I fought for my wife. And the good and the bad part of that is regular fighting lost a lot of flavor for me, because doing something that special and that unique, that meant so much personally to me, changed the way that I approached the SCA. So it's got a bad side to it too hard, because it was like, well, do I want to just go fight in this tournament again? It's not special. It's something that I talked to a lot of the guys who were doing Battle of the Nations and sent up ACL, and I knew they were going to go through this experience. Some of the guys who were really into it, because they've been doing SCA forever. Just going to another SCA tournament for them is the same thing they've been doing for years. Now they got this new, fresh thing with this experience of going to Europe and fighting these guys and meeting people from all over the world. It's going to change who they are as a fighter, and they may not be able to come back. So, to be careful. It can be a double-edged sword when you start stepping into that arena and doing that. There's a lot of other ways to do that. Another tool that when you're doing those things, nowadays we have the internet and we have social media. You can put a challenge out there and say, I'm going to hold the field after the fighting's in the pickups field. Everybody who would like to face me, come get some. You put it out there, people see it, they're like, I'm going to go kick that guy's ass. So it's there and it's part of it. But you want to make that special. Personal tokens that you can hand out to them. Coinage, if you're knights, gifts. I break up chains all the time, my fighting chains, and I give an undealt who inspires me a link from my chain, and I say, I see a knight in you, and one day you're going to return this to me, and you're going to have one of your own. I have a lot of those little links back over the years. Cool. So there's different things that you can do. You can offer ransom on yourself. If you feel that you've been bested with a knightly glove, something that is just outstanding, someone has juked you out of your socks and you want to recognize them for that, there's nothing wrong with going to them afterwards and saying, my Lord Squire, Sir Knight, your grace, you have bested me, I owe you ransom, here is a gift in my own hand, whatever that may be. It's a way of elevating our fighting culture and adding something to it and making a special moment and a connection with a whole group of people that now you'll have a brotherhood with beyond just fighting.
That's neat. That's really neat.
And we'll talk about that more when we're out at Helmet Time and everything else, and different things that I've seen done and that I've done and I've assisted with. There's a ransom game that some of us play at Penzic, especially the 14th century types, which I'm not of, but I'm sort of like their slumming 12th century brother. And we play a capture game in melees. We still do our jobs for our king, but if you're in the game and I'm in the game and I know because you're a player and we've discussed it, I'm going to try to take you. I'm going to try to take your arms and legs, and you're going to owe me a ransom, and you're going to have to pay it. And it's real stuff. And it's fun, because it's something that we do that adds a flavor to it, okay? It's not, there's no money on, there's no real prize money on the line. It's about adding a level of enjoyment and adding a little bit of that medieval mindset and trying to understand more of what it was to be an armed warrior. And all of that enriches the society, not only for yourself, but also for all the people who experience that and see that. I have people come back to me all the time, Sir Bryce, I remember your Roses quest, that was one of the coolest things I ever saw. Or I remember when you and your squire held the field against all, that was just this great field of prowess, and it inspired me, and I put on armor, and now I'm fighting. That happens all the time. Not through things that I've done, but I mean, that culture of arms gives back to society. So, at this point, we're going to warm up, we're going to put our armor on, we're going to start doing drills.